Welcome to the Berkshires Gone By, history and folklore about the westernmost and most beautiful county in Massachusetts. I'm your host, Brooke. I grew up in Lenox, on Cliffwood Street, and our backyard abutted a great expanse of forested parkland, a place called Kennedy Park. For the first 24 years of my life, these woods were home. I know it on and off trail, the ins and outs of the ruins, hidden and marked, the spots to find pink and purple quartz, the handful of 100-plus-year-old garbage dumps created by the hotel, cottages, and homes, where cracked china and cleverly painted pottery lay covered by a century of leaf litter. The abandoned car from the 1950s that hides at the edge of a clearing, the arbors that were once part of a fine Italian-style garden, the walls, the reservoirs, the footings, the barbed and ribbon wire from farms long gone, the natural springs, and the empty roofless shell of the little stone house. For 24 years, until I moved from my childhood home into adulthood, I was in those woods almost every single day, running around like a wild child, my siblings, my cousin, or my dog in tow, unsupervised children on grand adventures. Times were different back then. That's where my loves of hiking, nature, and of course history were fostered. My very first hikes were along a narrow trail from my backyard right up to the lookout at Kennedy Park, a trail that had already been there for almost a century, because my home had been the home of a caretaker of a place called Aspinwall. As a child, from the moment I first learned that name, I was enchanted. The idea that something so majestic and grand had been right there in my backyard thrilled my imagination, and I so desperately wanted to know what had become of it. My love of learning about the history of our beautiful county was born, and it all began when E.J. Woolsey and John Aspinwall, his brother-in-law, made a choice move when in 1853 they bought 500 acres of land behind and to the northwest of the church on the hill. Here they created the lovely Woodcliff Estate. Now, this wasn't a huge place. It was actually rather modest compared to the huge cottages to come. The earliest cottagers that came to the Berkshires this summer built lovely, but only slightly larger than normal homes. The property, however, that Woolsey and Aspinwall bought was so large that they invited locals to hike and enjoy the natural beauty there. The land became known as the Woolsey Woods, and at least 8 miles of picturesque carriage roads were built for everyone to enjoy. The home, Woodcliff, was a beautiful and ornate structure. Gothic-style decorative details littered the house, and it had one of the best views in town, especially from the first and second floor porches, which faced north, toward Greylock. And though the house wasn't as large as those that would be later built in Lenox, the family brought enough servants with them to run a much larger estate, including 21 horses. Almost 50 years on, Thomas Hubbard came along, a veteran general of the Civil War. He acquired 400 acres of the Aspinwall-Woolsey land and set about building a hotel. The mountaintop above Cliffwood Street was cleared, and work began. They finished the massive building in 1902, and the Aspinwall Hotel was opened. It sat like a golden gem atop the mountain, looking southward out over Lenox Village and toward everything beyond. It had been painted a pale yellow, and each of its hundreds of windows were flanked by smart dark shutters that not only added interest in a decorative sense, but also allowed the building to be buttoned up over the long winter months when it was closed for the season. There really wasn't a back of the building. The side facing the drive was just as stunning as the side that faced the view. White columns towered along both sides, and the entire extent of the first floor was wrapped in deep porches, the perfect place for guests to stroll and enjoy the sights or lounge in one of the hundreds of intricately woven wicker chairs that Aspinwall had become known for. The 6-story hotel was topped with two 2-story observation towers, the lower floor of which was enclosed. The upper was open but covered. From that spot, guests were treated to a 360-degree view of the surrounding Berkshire landscape, up past Greylock and down into Connecticut. I don't think there's a more perfect description of the view from Aspinwall than was published in 1902 in the book Lenox and the Berkshire Highlands, and written by R. DeWitt Mallory. Mallory first describes seeing the long-distance view from high in the bell tower of the church on the hill, but then goes on to write, "Yet for the sake of a more extensive view, and the greater convenience of seeing it, I'm going to ask you to accept a chair by my side on the piazza of the Aspinwall Hotel, which has recently been built a little further up this hillside, and which, with its extensive grounds, its magnificent situation, its ample accommodations, and modern facilities, enters this year upon its career of promise. By a turn of the eyeball, as Mr. Beecher said, your eye sweeps the far-off horizon of Greylock to Taconic Dome. Lenox lies down immediately beneath you. Our aerial point of view does not disclose the location of all the estates, but will reveal salient features. Out of Stockbridge Bowl, 3 miles off to the southwest, rises on the right Bald Head, on whose side, as they slope down many hundred feet into the lake, we can see beautiful summer villas. Here is among those much smaller the 900-acre estate of Anson P. Stokes, Esquire, Shadowbrook, adorned with a grand and palatial castle in granite of composite architecture. On the other side of the bowl rises Rattlesnake, and between us and it a very high knoll, on which is perched Allan Wyndon, the charming villa of Charles Lenné, Esquire, whose many acres adjoin some of the largest estates in Lenox. The land descends, as we have said, on the other side of Allan Wyndon, to 2 small lakes. Across the waters of one, Lily Pond, on rising ground lies Wheatley, owned by Henry H. Cook, Esquire, with the belfry of the Curtisville Village Church in the far distance. At the steep western side of the other, Laurel Lake stretches over a vast acreage, Erskine Park, the estate of the distinguished inventor, George Westinghouse, Esquire, with the tall and slender spire of the Lee Village Church in the distance, erect and white against the mountain background, and the lake in the foreground. Between these 2 lakes lie Interlaken, belonging to the heirs of the late D.W. Bishop, Esquire, and Elm Court, the property of William D. Sloane, Esquire, either of which 2 late-named estates cover a vast area of territory. Elm Court was created by Mr. Sloane in 1887, though greatly enlarged since by extensive acquisitions of adjacent property. Turning our eyes now further around to the left, on the ground rising out of Laurel Lake to the east and north, and touching the very waters themselves, are the Wharton, Sargent, and Golett estates, while back of them, still on higher ground, forming a sort of concentric quadrant, are the Foster, Barnes, John Sloane, and Patterson estates, all large and adorned with beautiful villas. We do not see all these places from where we are sitting, but we see pretty nearly where they are. We shall see them more closely when we come to go out to them in our drives about Lenox. All of them are comparatively recent construction, though one, that of John Sloane, Esquire, Wyndhurst, is on the old Beecher place. In a way it may be said that the ridge of our height of observation to the Lenné place and on beyond to the Westinghouse estate is a sort of divide in the waters, of one side flowing ultimately into Stockbridge, and those of the other side reaching at last Laurel Lake. Each of those longitudinally divided sections of the town has its distinctive view. Each was early recognized in the development of the place into the resort it has become. If now we turn our eyes to the northward, where Greylock stands up clearly in the far-off northern horizon, we get another distinct section of Lenox. And here 2 miles away from the Aspinwall are the estate of the late Colonel R.T. Atchmity, the Dormers, and nearer, that of the late William H. Bradford, Esquire, Wayside. These are large estates, charmingly situated on high ground, commanding views of Greylock, the Housatonic River, up and down its tortoise course, and beautiful October Mountain, rising abruptly from the opposite bank of the winding stream, and off in the opposite direction, the massive mountain ramparts of the Taconics, with Yokin's Seat, conspicuous amongst them, as though that ancient chieftain were fortified by natural barriers against the dwellers in Mount Ephraim, Richmond, on the other side. Nestled under Yokin's Seat, though itself on very high ground, is the estate of Thomas Shields Clark, the sculptor. But so far our glance has been out upon the township rather than down upon the town. Look down now, sheer down, say 300 feet from the sightly piazza where we are sitting. We are upon the edge of a bluff. The golfers going the rounds in the links below us seem moving miniatures. Halfway down the steep bluff, and a little to the left, are 2 handsome estates, commanding, though lower, much the same view as we are seeing. Belvoir Terrace, the property of Morris K. Jessup, Esquire, President of the New York Chamber of Commerce, and Underledge, belonging to Joseph W. Burden, Esquire. Down there on the lower level, among the many other smaller estates, all of which are situated on high enough ground to command prospects which vie with the one stretching out before our eyes, there are 3 estates, created 25 years ago. Windyside, with its Swiss chalet, owned by Dr. Richard C. Greenleaf. Ethelwyn, property of Mrs. Robert Winthrop, lately purchased of the Henry Bream estate, another part of the same estate having been purchased by Dr. Henry P. Jacks, and called Home Farm. That is it that we see with its English manor house yonder to the right, and another one of the 3 estates, named, is Stonover, the very large and beautiful estate belonging to John E. Parsons, Esquire. Mr. Parsons' property has been very greatly enlarged since his original purchase of 25 years since, by the acquisition of a tract of adjoining marshland, which has been drained and transformed into a park, which the public very generally and gladly avail itself of for drives. I think I've indicated the locations of the largest estates in Lenox, with the exception of 2, which lie off to the east of us, the villas belonging to the same being in the heart of town itself, but a stone's throw from the Camplene Tower of Trinity Church, yonder, far to the left, Ventfort Hall, built by George H. Morgan, Esquire, an Elizabethan manor house, large, rich, chaste, and simple, and Pinecroft, the summer home of F. Augustus Schumerhorn, Esquire, whose long residence, extensive holdings of realty, and deep interest in Lenox make him, like so many others of the summer residents here, seem as much a part of the town as those who have been born and bred within it. I have tried not to indicate with any completeness the location of all these estates, villas, and summer cottages in Lenox, only what can be seen in the main from the lofty Aspinwall, which crowns the crest of this bluff, on the old Wolsey Place, one of the oldest estates in the town. And thus his beautiful description of the view from these porches ends. Aspinwall Hotel boasted 225 well-appointed guest rooms for visitors, roughly 400 rooms altogether. And that's not all. One old advertisement from 1915 reads, "In the heart of the famous Berkshires, one of the most fashionable and attractive resorts in this country accommodates 500 guests. 3 golf courses, tennis, saddle horses, driving, motoring, dancing, etc. Remains open until late in October. Furnished cottages for rent for the season. Right for circular, W.W. Brown, Lenox, Mass. Another reads, high and cool in the Berkshire Hills. One main line of motor travel. Golf, tennis, saddle horses, concerts, and dancing. The most beautiful summer and autumn resort in America. June 13th to October 15th. Desirable cottages with hotel services. And another. Altitude 1,460 feet. The Hotel Beautiful of the Berkshires. Table and service of the highest standard. Fine motor roads, golf, tennis, saddle horses, driving, etc. Orchestral music and dancing. Accommodates 400 guests. Our own fireproof garage adjoining. On the route of the ideal tour. And its stunning dining room wasn't just for show either. A surviving menu from Wednesday, July 4th, 1806, lists what was available for luncheon, including broiled Spanish mackerel, consommé in cups, chicken broth, lamb, plain lobster, smoked tongue, spiced salmon, pickled beets, asparagus, sponge jelly drops, assorted cakes, wafer jumbles, raspberry tartettes, and at the bottom of its listing brags that the milk, cream, and butter used in this hotel is pasteurized. A novelty at the time. People came to the Berkshires to escape the hot, stuffy city summers, as they still do today. So the fact that guests could saunter off of the porches, cross the perfectly groomed Italian-style mountaintop gardens, and wander into acre after acre of forest along beautiful paths and bridle trails was perfect. And where better to go when two young singles met for the first time, perhaps running into each other at the hotel and wanting nothing more than to get away from their families for a little talk of romance. The hotel's reputation grew quickly. Its size made it one of the biggest in the country, but its beauty put it on the map. No detail was overlooked. Fine wood moldings throughout, massive hand-woven carpets, countless pieces of art upon the walls, even a tiny gift shop across the hall from a newsstand, complete with up-to-the-minute ticker tape of the stock prices for those workaholics of yesteryear. Soon people of high acclaim had heard of it and came to see what it had to offer. John D. Rockefeller, both Franklin and Theodore Roosevelt, Seth Low, and Lillian Russell, to name a few. Nearby, parties at Woodcliff were common and popular. Guests who couldn't overnight at the original structure upon the property stayed just up the drive at Aspinwall. Tipsy partygoers could be seen elbow to elbow, stumbling merrily up the way and back to their rooms. And as time went on, the hotel only got bigger, brighter, and more popular. Electric lights and elevators, telephones joined the telegraph, and of course, there was more to do by way of recreation. Not even the development of the Great Depression slowed its growth. It was prospering, with no end in sight, and it could have remained, to this day, one of the greatest hotels. Like the famous Mohonk Mountain House in the Catskills, constructed around the same time, that still dazzles visitors with its spectacular views. Aspinwall was on its way to becoming an icon of the industry. But in the pre-dawn hours of the 25th of April, 1931, before it had opened for the season, when the halls were silent and the air atop the mountain light with the scent of spring, smoke could be smelt. Local residents noticed the plume of black billowing from the grand structure above town and called for help, but there was nothing the fire department could do when they arrived. The fire had already grown too large. There were hydrants in town by then, but the closest one was so far away that the water pressure was too weak to do anything. But the builders of Aspinwall had thought of fire and had installed what was the most advanced sprinkler system at the time. But during the winter months, when the building stood empty and the heat was turned off, all the pipes had to be drained, including those of the sprinkler system, to prevent them from freezing and bursting. So, as the flames poured into the sky, and the enormous structure fell in on itself, There was nothing anyone could do. Its spot, high on the mountain ridge, made it visible far and wide. And, far and wide, people stopped and gazed into the distance to watch it burn. Hundreds of firefighters from Lenox and nearby towns did what they could to prevent the fire from creeping into the woods, but that's what little they had any control of. When it was finally over, and the hotel was nothing but ruins, it was determined that the fire was probably started by the irresponsible disposal of smoking materials. It was perfectly normal for people to walk up to the hotel even when it was closed, to saunter around the grounds and sit on the porches to take in the views. Perhaps a local had gone to walk upon the porches and taken the beautiful stars above, and had carelessly tossed away a cigarette or cigar, or maybe a caretaker, one of the few that stayed in the small cottages on the property. April 25th, 1931, the Evening News from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, had the longest description of the fire I could find. Summer colony in Berkshires swept by fire. Lenox, Mass., April 25th, a disastrous fire swept the fashionable summer resort colony here today, destroying the largest hotel, several cottages, and a large stretch of woods before it was brought under control. Damage was estimated by the Lenox Police Department at $1 million. Hundreds of volunteer firefighters from Lenox and other villages in the picturesque resort section near the western Massachusetts line battled all night against the blaze, which started about 1:15 a.m. and at one time threatened to wipe out the entire resort. The fire started in the hotel and soon spread to several surrounding cottages. Sparks simultaneously ignited the surrounding timber, which burned rapidly. Only a few persons were living at the resort, since the regular season does not start until June 1st. And it was necessary to call fire companies from Pittsfield, about 20 miles distance, Lee and Stockbridge, to aid the local firemen. The Aspinwall Hotel, leading hostelry, was burned to the ground. It was a 400-room structure, said by the police to be owned by the Humbert estate of New York City. Only the caretakers were in the place when the fire of undetermined origin started. The police department received no report of death or injuries in the blaze, although hazardous conditions were encountered in fighting it. Lenox, which is situated about 10 miles from the state line, is one of the favorite resorts of the Berkshire Hills region. The firefighters remained in the woodland part of the resort until dawn, extinguishing the fire. After all that, there wasn't much left, and the site was left for nature to take back. Hikers, though, still came to spend splendid long days exploring the beautiful forest. Even without the hotel, the Wolsey Woods were still magical. 25 years later, there was nothing left of Aspinwall but some foundation walls where it once stood, and Lenox had the option of buying the land back for a slim $12,000. So that's what happened. The town named it Kennedy Park, after John Drummond Kennedy, the man most responsible for its acquisition by the town and preservation. The original paths are still there, with a few newer additions. The carriage roads still amble their way gracefully through the landscape, and the looped driveway that once escorted visitors to the door of the hotel remains. If you kick around in the leaves at the side of it, you can still find the curb, which is original to the first time it was paved. Footings of outbuildings. My long history with this place affords it the warmest spot in my heart, a fondness which is shared with a huge number of other people. And this mutual love for this place came into sharp focus in 2011, when the family of a doctor who died in 2004 at the age of 39 installed a monument without much warning or public approval. They did improve the overlook with a nicer fence, benches, fire pit, picnic table, but the monument, which they call the Belvedere, is a terribly modern and horribly large L-shaped slab of smooth stones, which dominates the clearing and is on the site of the hotel at the Aspinwall Overlook. It's not a monument that has anything to do with the history of Aspinwall or the town of Lenox. It's a monument to their son, a man who wasn't from Lenox, who didn't live here, but liked to hike Kennedy Park. Lawsuits quickly followed. Lots of them. This show is about history and folklore pertaining to Berkshire County, and I don't often take sides. It's not a show about politics or who's right or who's wrong. But this time, I understand being heartbroken and mourning the loss of a loved one. I understand wanting to create something in their honor. But if the monument at their grave isn't enough, there's a right and a wrong way to go about creating something more. A monument in a public place needs to echo the architectural stylings of the area, which the existing one fails completely to do. Something reminiscent of Aspinwall, like a tall white column, mimicking the ones that once graced the buildings in their dozens, would have been perfect. Consider Ashentilly and its 4 amazing columns that stand like graceful ghosts at the edge of the woods. Imagine then a column instead, and upon its base a description of the hotel and its history, its importance to the town, and after that description, a paragraph along the lines of erected in the memory of so-and-so who loved this place. Something like that adds to the beauty and to our collected experience of this historical spot by reminding us of our shared history and connectedness. But that's not what this monument is. It's instead sadly diversive, and I know that's not at all what the family had intended. They just wanted to pay honor to their son. It's diversive because this spot isn't for any one person, and putting a monument there to a single man is like claiming it as his. So many people love this place and have passed away, and so many families have grieved. So at this rate, shouldn't all their names be on that huge slab of stone? Of course not, because this place belongs to everyone. Well, I'll stop there. I think you can tell that this monument is still a sore spot for many of us from Lenox. No matter what, the specter of Aspinwall and those who created, those who saved this land, still hang heavy in these woods. And these woods are protected because of their actions, and the love of this place they'd fostered since before Lenox even became a popular summer town. And in the end, that's what matters. Our collective love of this spot. Past, present, and future. This has been The Berkshires Gone By. Created, written, directed, and read by myself, Brooke Renier, and co-produced by Deanna Garner. You can follow us and find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, where we post pictures almost daily pertaining to Berkshire history. Episodes can be found on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and by visiting www.theberkshiresgoneby.com. That last one, our website, hosts every episode we've ever created, and images pertaining to each individual episode. If you have an idea for an episode, feel free to contact us at any time, and we hope you'll join us for our next episode. Thanks for listening.